Everywhere you look nowadays, prices have skyrocketed. Gas, groceries, housing, the list goes on as inflation continues to climb. And now many of those that are near or at retirement are worried about the impact inflation will have on their retirement savings. So what can be done to help protect you and your savings from inflation? Well, joining us to discuss this is Gary Mattson and Taylor Steward, part of the family and the sponsor of this segment, Mattson Financial Services, a financial firm that has been helping people retire successfully in West Michigan for decades. You can also catch them on their radio show, Money Mentors. So, Gary, Taylor, glad to see you here. Okay, so where exactly is inflation heading?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest words when you hear it on the news and such about inflation is transitory, which is a fancy word of saying not long lasting, right? But now we're seeing supply chain issues. We're seeing the labor markets tightening up, even though there's a lot of people out there that could get back to work. And then you've got all sorts of other factors coming in on that. So I feel that inflation we're going to continue to see tick up as time goes on. Right now it's sitting at about 6%. Depends on who you ask, though, right? And like you had mentioned, every time you go to the gas pump, every time you go to the gas station, my wife Laurel and I always play the game, how much is it going to cost at the end of the day when you're paying for your groceries? And the last time we did it wasn't quite so much fun, so we stopped guessing altogether.
Yeah, we're ready to get a break cut to us, I think. Yeah. And so, of course, there is a study that basically says 71% of retirees are fearful that inflation will ruin their retirement. What do you think about that?
It's so true. I mean, let's face it, unless your money's keeping up with the cost of things, you're going to go behind. And then, you know, look at it from the standpoint when you lose one spouse also, it makes it even worse because you lose a tax deduction, you lose Social Security, now you're going to use more of your assets, and inflation, it's really why people are scared that they're going to run out of money. So there's some things you really got to put in play in perspective to making sure your money lasts.
Yeah. Okay, so of course we look from decade to decade, and it's comical and a little disheartening to look at the difference in price cost. But when you think about when we retire, we might spend decades in retirement. That is something that we need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why it's so important to get a full income plan and bring all the pieces of the puzzle in your retirement plan together. Not just how are we going to invest those dollars, but how are we going to mitigate taxes in retirement? That helps with returns down the road too, and that's more money in your pocket. How can we invest to outpace inflation, but not necessarily take on more risk? So diversifying those assets and then maximizing Social Security and all of these other things. So you really have to have a cohesive plan to make sure that it is going to last you down the road.
Yeah. And let's face it, if you've spent 24 years in retirement and your assets grow at just 3%, let's say you had $750,000, when you leave this earth, you have $1.5 million. All that money has done is just kept up with inflation. In other words, it's still worth what it is, so you have buying power. But if you don't have that, you're going backwards really, really quick. So if you're going to pass that on to your heirs, it's really important to watch the returns, taxes, all of that, and make sure you don't have these big gouges of times when the market goes down that you capture those losses.
So depending on where you are, is it really important to stay conservative with what you are doing and the decisions you're making? So
traditionally when we get into retirement, we want to become more conservative, right? Because we don't want these large swings in the market, but when you're forced to keep pace with inflation that's not just 2% or 2.5%, you're talking 6 or north, now it opens up the scheme of, do we have to become more risky? And if you're a risk-averse client, you know, that can be a really tough decision. And that's why bringing in other areas, you know, the tax planning to help mitigate what that's going to cost to help increase returns down the road, but also looking at different types of investments, not just your traditional stock and bond portfolios, you know, different assets like commodities and real estate and other products out there to help increase your income as the increase in inflation happens along the entire life of your plan.
Yeah, so you recommend diversification within the portfolio.
Huge.
How do you go about that with folks?
Well, it's really about understanding two phases of the plan. That is income, what you're going to use now, and what you're going to use in the future, or your lifestyle. And so you really want to have that diversification beyond stocks and bonds, like Taylor said, and having those in plan that you understand when they're going to do well and when they're not going to do well. As Taylor said, commodities and real estate do very well for inflation fighting. but they don't do very well for long-term investing. Gold's one of the worst things you can hold for very long term, but when inflationary times come, it's actually a double-digit return on those. So we want to get in and out of assets when it's appropriate for your portfolio.
Yeah, so for those who are watching who are very concerned about inflation, what do you tell them?
Well, for the next 5 callers, if you saved at least $250,000 or more, what we would do is sit down and actually do a full income plan, laying out where the income's going to come from, the ones that you know you can count on, like Social Security, pensions, if you're lucky enough. And then we actually put together an income plan showing you that where the dollar's going to come from, the growth of those dollars, how much more you can take later in life to make sure you get all the way through retirement, not just to retirement.
Yeah, so for you at home, take advantage of that special offer from Mattson Financial. If you're nearing retirement or already retired, Gary, Taylor, and the rest of the team will sit down with you personally to customize a retirement plan just for you. This is a comprehensive plan that not only includes a look at taxes and investments, but also taxes and income sources, and so much more to help you get to and through that retirement that you deserve. Call now, 616-514-3831. That is 616-514-3831. We talk to you a lot, and we know there is a lot to consider. We've covered inflation today, but yet there's even more, so thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
We look forward to it.
And this segment is sponsored by Mattson Financial Services. We'll be right back with more 8 West.
That's West.